Hey, everybody, and welcome to the Rabbit Trail Podcast. This is episode number 99.
99.
One away from 100.
One away from 100.
Oh, and thanks. This is getting a little irritating. And we're only a week away from year two, from starting year two. So
that was so crazy when you're a little kid. Then you get so mad and they just kept copying you. It's like, really? I don't know. Can't you just ignore them?
I would just say, you're the greatest. You're the greatest. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much. So we're, anyway, if you're joining with us for the first time, my name is Greg Harris. I'm the senior pastor here at the church that sponsors the podcast, Olive Branch Community Church, and we're glad you're joining with us today. And my repeating compatriots are
Stephen Oldham,
he's the local outreach
coordinator, and he is awesome and great and cool. I didn't repeat that part. No, thank you guys for following us. If you're still following us, make sure you like that like bell and subscribe and hit the thumbs up and let us know that you're following us on YouTube, or if you're listening to the audio, subscribe to the audio. And send in your 100th episode questions. We probably can use some really good questions. You can go back, and if you've been watching the podcast for a while, something you thought or some questions you have for each of us, it'd be great to be able to answer questions on our 100th episode.
Yeah.
Which is the next one.
Like, what did you like about the last 100 episodes? Give me one thing you liked from every episode.
Whoa.
100 questions per person.
Or you know what would be fun too? I mean, really, going on what you said, but just send in like the most vivid memory you have. You know, like whether it been something funny, whether it been something.
Was it about the scabs?
Yeah.
Some people it was about the scabs.
Like I was listening to the podcast and got in an accident because of what you said, like something like that? Or
like that would be Christian, right?
I guess.
Said something. And,
I mean, not that he is, we're talking about the person Christian, not that it would be Christian to crash your car into somebody.
I know. Do we want to give out awards for who asked the most questions this year and all that fun stuff? Or
we'll do that at the live event when we do the next live event.
We're brainstorming, right?
Yeah.
In the middle of
so you guys need to get your comments and your questions in now, because we're tallying them, and at the next live event, you're going to win wonderful, wonderful prizes.
Things you could re-gift for elephant.
Yeah, and so again, like just send in information, send in comments and feedback and stuff like that at rabbittrail@obcc.church, rabbittrail@obcc.church. And one of the things that I think that would be fun too, like, you know, maybe for the live event, or at least portion of it, if people send in a lot of questions, maybe we could even invite them to the table to have a conversation with us and ask some questions. Not that that's really, that spectacular of a prize, but,
but paste your face all over YouTube.
Yeah, it might be fun. So it'd be might be fun to have a conversation with you. So probably more fun for us than it is for you. But
we'll ask you a bunch of questions, like,
Yeah.
I don't know. What happened to the dinosaurs?
So coming into this podcast here, we are in between Christmas and New Year's. So we're just coming off our Christmas services, which was great. Had a lot of fun. Saw a lot of people.
Missed a lot of who I didn't get to see, but it was still fun.
Yeah, we had 4 services.
4 services, yeah.
And that same Christian rocked it on the guitar. It was incredible.
Yeah,
super good.
Christian and then Andy.
And then Andy.
Yeah,
that was a great opening, man. Lots of energy. The whole service was great.
You can watch it now. I think on YouTube you can see it. That'd be great to watch. So, good guitar jam.
And so we can just get right into the service.
Wait. What was your favorite gift you got? It's after Christmas. Did you get a favorite gift?
You know what? Life is gift enough for me. But I did get a couple of games. So, I got some new games to play when you come over. So that would be fun. And
we should turn this into a game recommendation podcast, because those seem to do better than theology podcasts.
Yeah. Yeah. So we got a trivia game that is fun. And then we got another game, Splendor, I think it is.
Okay.
We talked about it before, but I'd played that one. So I got that, and I got a new pair of tennis shoes. So
cool.
Yeah. What'd you get?
Yeah, I'm trying to debate whether I'm going to enjoy the 25-pound weights or the 40-pound weights more, because I just pretty much got weights.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was it. Like, the weights are expensive, I found out. So that's pretty much all you get when you buy those. But no, actually, I kind of cool.
Were they from your wife?
and my kids.
Wow.
And yeah, but I got a
And
really
they want
cool.
to pump you up.
I want to pump me up, make sure I look really big and muscular. But I did get a really cool book for my wife. It's like the full collection of the Sherlock Holmes novels.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll be
Sir
playing my
Arthur Conan
violin,
Doyle.
and reading those and making deductive arguments. It'll be great. I'm looking forward to it.
What'd you get, Steve? Anything fun?
I got to eat, that's for sure. No, I've got the game Red 7, which is a card game, and I immediately played it with the kids. So it's,
fun.
it's the card game. I don't know if you played it. It's a good game, but I'm into board games, so I put that on my list. But I'm trying to get the kids like nerded up before they're too old, and so we're playing games that are not like Uno. It would take 25 hours to play Uno or Life. I'm like, let's play this game. It's even better.
You know, it takes a long time to play.
It does if you're playing with little kids.
Oh.
They're like, which one do I pick?
Skip. Oh, never mind. Take that card back. Oh, now I'm going to play this card now. I'm going to be here a while.
When I was growing up, the game of life was like one of my favorite games.
Oh.
You know, buying life insurance and making decisions and
Now,
yeah,
not so much.
You know, life isn't as smooth as, you know, the game of life. But, so
There's some philosophy in that.
there is. It is. It's
A lot
not
more choices too. Does it really create a multiverse when you choose other choices? Look at me going nerdy. Sorry.
I'm a board game snob. The game of life is like boring.
I enjoy it. Well,
Oh, which is better though? Would you rather play Life, Monopoly, or Catan?
I'd rather take a nap.
yeah. I will say out of those three, Life number 1, Catan number 2, and
Wow, Life
Monopoly.
beat Catan.
Monopoly.
I would play Catan over
Monopoly is
any
probably
day.
the most boring game that you can play. And
It's terrible.
I don't remember, but I just, as a child, it seemed like it was an all-day game. It seemed like it was like 6 hours long.
And while the game plays itself, you just roll the dice and come back an hour later and you find out who wins.
A lot of money exchanges, moves around. We should write some communist rules for it and see how that goes. Just for
Somebody
fun.
did.
Like,
Someone made a
did
comment.
they? Oh,
Yeah.
that's pretty funny.
Basically, you take all the properties and all the monies, and the people are just poor.
And
That's
then
the communist game, isn't it?
well, then we should produce a real capitalist version of it too. So it's neither. It's just a game. All right. Anyway, fun.
Now back to tabletop with Olive Branch.
Yes. And this is the kind of conversation you get when we get in here. Haven't spent much time together lately, and we are totally unprepared.
And we're getting a lot of people who love Monopoly, and they're gonna be all mad at us.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm okay with that, by the way. If you like Monopoly, you probably don't want to hang out with me all that much anyway.
Yes. I like trivia games and trivia games. Those are my favorite games. So, all right. So now talking about the service that just came on Christmas, and Christmas Eve, we had 4 services. It was great. And you did something that you have done on occasion. I think you kind of do them like every couple of few years. And it's kind of a one-man play, you know, a one-man monologue.
It's a sermon. It's a sermon.
It's a sermon. It's a monologue.
It's a sermon.
And you're doing it from a first-person perspective.
I think it's funny. Like every sermon's a monologue.
Yeah.
They're just long monologues, and so suddenly when I put it in first person, everyone's like, "Oh, you're such a great storyteller. It's a monologue. It's a this." I'm like, it's a sermon, legitimately. Like
It is, but it is more story-oriented.
You have to pretend like you're Joseph.
Yeah,
Most people aren't really good at doing that.
Yeah, I mean, you're taking on a persona, you're acting out that character, so it is more like a play than it is a sermon. And I don't remember having fill in the blanks and 3 points and send you home with a challenge. So, but you do it in a first person, and you've done it at Easter from Peter's perspective, and you took on the role of Peter and kind of told the story. And this one was
I
Joseph.
did Barabbas last time.
Barabbas last time?
Good Friday, yeah.
Yeah, you did.
And this method of preaching, though, did you learn it in the school?
Yeah, I learned it at
because
Talbot.
I thought
Talbot,
it was
in our advanced preaching courses, you learn first-person narrative preaching. It's intended to actually deliver a bunch of things that people don't normally get. Like, it is a boring thing for a pastor just to tell you the background of stuff. Like, you could spend legitimately a good hour of a sermon just talking about background and like, how am I going to get into the honor shame society, and that and then you got to know that that pathway around Samaria, that's going to be a 3-day journey if you've got it all worked out right. It's like you can say that kind of stuff.
And now that I've given you the background, we're going to get into the sermon. Sorry, we don't have time.
Yeah, exactly. But what's fun about a first person is you integrate it into the story so that people are picking up history and picking up the background, picking up the culture, if you do it correctly, like without having to tell them directly, this is what's going on or this is the information. I really enjoy first persons. You can't use them too much because they're kind of like,
then you become a playhouse and not a church.
yeah, they're kind of, you can only really hit the one main point, and then you don't even really get to elaborate. It's just kind of like, boom, I'm going to land on the point and moving on. So,
and it does take preparation like you would a normal sermon too, because you have to make sure the information is at least accurate.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had to sit down, and people don't realize, like, one of the things that like I have to debate whose name I'm going to use for Joseph's dad, right?
Yeah.
Because the genealogies of different names. So it's Eli in the book of Luke, or Heli, or whatever you want to say. And then it's Jacob in the book of Matthew. And so then you're getting lost in all the readings about, like, well, how do you line up these genealogies? And there's like debates out there that this is Mary's line. So that's why I used Eli for Mary's. Luke is Mary's lineage. And so you go with that one, and Matthew is Joseph's lineage because it's focused on him. So I used that tradition a little bit more in this one because I called Mary's dad, Eli. And so, but what's fun about that is there's all these debates about, well, how do you bring these two together? Are they the same person with different names? Are they different people? And Jacob is the actual father, and Eli is the uncle who had to, step in because Jacob died early, and so Joseph is of his line, but actually Eli's son because they had that kind of those marriage situations where
Levirate law.
Yeah, Levirate marriage. For everybody who's wondering what that means, is like if you're a woman and you're married to a man, but he dies before you give him a son or child, and the brother will marry you to keep the line of that old husband alive. And some people go like, oh, that's what happened here with Joseph. And so that's why we got two different names. And because the grandfather seems to be the same, both Matthew and Mathat are the same in both. So it's just kind of you get into some really strange things, but you wouldn't realize that by me just referencing Eli and Jacob. So,
but if you listen to the story and you pick out things that should make you want to go, is that his name? And you kind of go back through the Bible, and it makes some people kind of look at the facts in a different way.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of like you would if you're watching The Chosen or something. You're like, well, why did they make that choice? Or what are they doing there? What are they saying about that passage or whatever?
Yeah, if The Chosen's doing it like it's historical, it's not really doing a lot of the historical stuff. It's
interpretive.
Yeah, it's like, for example, the big thing that unlocked the Christmas story for me, when I was preparing this years ago, like when I had taken the class, it was around 2007 or something. I'd already experimented once with like a Peter version when I was a youth pastor, and it went over pretty well. And then for Christmas one year, I was like, oh, I'll do Joseph. And it was during then that I had read a book by Moises de Silva on honor and shame in Hebrew culture. And reading that, it was like everything clicked. And I was like, oh my gosh. Well, why wouldn't, because my big question was like, always like, well, why wouldn't, Joseph and Mary be able to find a home? You got this pregnant woman and you got all these ancestral homes. He's going to his ancestral home. It's likely he's got family in town with a house that's theirs, like, especially in the Jewish world where he didn't give up property. And I'm like, there's got to be somebody's home. And then the fact that, here's another weird one, when you read there was no room at the inn, we brought this up before.
Right.
The word is kataluma, and that is actually the word in the book of Luke, same word in Luke, that's used later for the upper room. And the upper room is the guest room where you would prepare things and where guests would sleep. It's where out-of-towners would come. And it was above the paddocks, and it was above that space. And so you would end up with this this idea that you'd go up the stairs to the guest room and you wouldn't be allowed in because there was no room. And the no room is like, yeah, okay, so there was lots of people there. We get that. But also it's like, why wouldn't you kick somebody out for a pregnant woman?
Yeah.
And the only answer that I could come up to that was logical was
the honor shame.
they were being shamed because she was so pregnant. But then also it's kind of interesting, why would later everyone assume Jesus is Joseph's son, except that they probably kept it kind of hush-hush. Why would she go away for 3 months to Elizabeth? Well, because it was early on. They just needed to get her out of town before this got, started really showing and developing. When they got back, likely she was married. That's why he says, but they didn't consummate it yet. They had to make that clear. So there's all these little hints in the text that if you were reading it in the first century, you'd been going like, oh, this is a horribly shameful, difficult situation. You would have had that already as you're reading the text, because we don't have an honor shame society. We don't read that at all.
Yeah.
No, I mean, just briefly, when you're putting together a sermon, right, on a normal everyday Sunday versus something like this, is this require a lot more study than a normal sermon, or is it pretty equal, or is it less?
It's different. I think that it requires a different function of your thinking. So like where a basic sermon, I'm trying to do the exegesis, bring that background information up like we're doing, so that I get the right kind of aim for the text. Then I have to go one step further and try to figure out, okay, culturally in our world, how does this look? Where does that fit? So there's a whole second step that you're going through evaluating current modern Corona or Riverside, Southern Californian culture. Like, I'm not going to preach about like Southern U.S., the Southern culture of the U.S. or the Northern culture of the U.S. I'm not going to reference the Mason-Dixon line like so many people on the East Coast do. We don't even think in those terms. So there's that kind of cultural exegesis that you're doing, cultural study. And then you flip over and you go back to the text and you got to draw it in with application. You don't have to do that with the first person. But what you do is you...
He said doo-doo.
We're right back there, aren't we? So what you...
We're glad you're here, Brent.
Yeah. We actually have to do... Thanks for the really solid input. Or output, whichever way you want to think about that. The actual like pulling together of a narrative, you've really got to make sure as much as you can that if you're going to bring something up, it's actually from the text, narrative tension, and historically accurate somewhat in the background. And so there's some things that aren't, you're just kind of guessing at, you're speculating, but they're in kind of the ancient milieu. Now, I'm not going to use language like they would use back then, so I'll like say okay or things like that because speaking to modern Americans. But yeah, I think it's different because you're studying the story and you're trying to really capture how did this story look, or how do these pieces fit together to be cohesive and not, and now you're, especially on Christmas, you're fighting traditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you are.
You're pushing off all these different traditions to try to figure out, is this what it's like? And being a guy who didn't grow up in like a traditional church, and kind of came to faith later in life. It was at evangelical church that wasn't all into Advent and stuff like that. I think it gave me a leg up to kind of look at it from a like, well, historically, what's going on here, instead of like, oh, I got to get into the debates about all the different things with Advent and stuff.
So, I mean, I know that, as you're studying and you're putting all this stuff together, you're trying to be true and accurate to Scripture and to the culture of the times. But how much liberties do you take, and where do you feel that it's inappropriate to take liberties, or, it's fine to take liberties?
Well, I think I take some liberties. The liberties come in the way of attempting to create the tension and to show off what's really going on. Did Mary's dad ever slap her across the face for saying, hey, no, God, Dad, it's not Joseph, it's from God. That's a liberty. I don't know if a father would slap his daughter across the face, but that,
because it's blasphemy.
Yeah, I mean, I'm making a kind of a logical kind of emotional
it's in the realm
connection.
Of possibility.
Yeah, I think so. I think it's in the realm of possibility. A father would be so irate with his daughter that
in the ancient world,
that he would slap her for what would look like to us if our daughters were telling us, "Oh no, I'm really pregnant from God, Dad." It's like, what?
Yeah.
So I think that was a liberty
in a culture that you could be stoned for blasphemy.
Right. Well, yeah, actually, stoned for blasphemy and stoned for adultery.
Yeah.
Like now, how far that actually went by the Roman time periods is debatable, but they were in Nazareth, and that's a pretty like the closest city was this place called Sepphoris, and it's down the mountain. It's probably where Jesus worked most of his life and got a lot of training from. But it was a Greek town, and so Nazareth is like the sticks, like it's up in the nowheresville, and they probably held some pretty strong honor shame things. And so, would they have stoned her to death if he had divorced her publicly? Because that was kind of the danger. You divorce publicly, and the honor and shame falls completely on the other family, to the point that to redeem their honor, they would stone her to death, as like she's no longer of us. And so, I mean, this is a serious situation. Like it is, but to divorce her quietly was to kind of like go, we'll let them have the shame, and we will just let them do what they're going to do.
And not to pile on.
Yeah. It's so there's some liberty also, like in the travel narrative, where they wouldn't let her ride the donkey or whatever. It's just kind of weird. Like a lot of scholars ask, like, why would Mary have to go? Like you don't take your wife with you. It's only the head of household that needs to go to Bethlehem to sign up. Not to mention there's lots of debates whether that's even feasible. You're going to go all the way to your location where your ancestral home was. Like that doesn't make any sense. Everybody's crossing traffic everywhere. The only reason it makes sense is if Herod did it on purpose to kind of try to tie everybody to their ancestry to make them feel better. And so, like, you would go to, like, hey, you're part of the tribe of Benjamin, go to the area of Benjamin. You're part of the tribe of Judah, go down to Judah. Go to your hometown from your ancestry. And so, especially if he may have been trying to flush out Davidic pretenders. We don't know, because some people suspect that Herod adjusted this census to ensure that it would be palatable to the Jewish people. And so it would be honoring their heritage and not just an honor to Caesar. So that's why some people wonder, some scholars have posited perhaps that's what was going on there. So it's a little bit of an interesting thing that Mary would go, but it makes sense in an honor shame situation, especially if she was starting to show that you would take her with you down there. And so what would happen if you're with all the boys? And I made liberties of Joseph having brothers and stuff like that, but that's again a very possible, very real, very possible situation. So, and her being kept away or whatever. Yeah. So some of that's liberties. Yeah.
So one of the other questions that comes out of kind of the Christmas story, but looking at Scripture, Joseph's death, right?
That comes out of Christmas?
Well, I mean, Joseph is in the Christmas story, and then he disappears in Scripture. So my question is
where'd he go?
We always talk about, probably Joseph died. Is there any corroborating evidence or extra biblical stories or folklore that claim that he died, or is it just kind of deductive reasoning? He disappeared in the way that we, explain that away as saying that he must have died.
Stephen, you ever checked any of that out before?
I've not found anything in concrete as to whether, they have anything outside corroborating whether he died. But typically in a narrative, if someone drops out of the story, and especially early on like he does, it's most likely due to a death. And so what I was always told, and you correct me if I'm wrong, though, that most likely he passed away early on in the story, because he's not mentioned. And then you start getting James mentioned, the older brother, and they're coming in and talking to Jesus when he starts his ministry. And it would have been something the father would have done if he were present. So we all of a sudden we have Jesus when he starts his ministry. There's no father there anymore.
Now, when you say James, the older brother, you're not talking about Jesus' older brother.
I am talking about Jesus' older brother.
How can he be an older brother?
The oldest brother.
The oldest of the brothers, yeah.
That was one thing in the play that you did that I thought was pretty clever. But this is Jesus, and this is my son James, and it was like, whoa, that was kind of
tricky
clever.
There. Yeah. There's a couple actually lines to why we believe Joseph is dead. Starting with the situation where Jesus returns to Nazareth to do the kind of he returned home, Nazareth. Of course, I got to spell it right.
No, this may take a while.
Yeah, exactly. I'm a horrible speller. Anyway, so when he went back to Nazareth, he was there, and they said, "Hey, don't we know this man? We know where this guy came from." They start referencing all of his family. So as it goes, the crowds were the prophet Jesus, Nazareth. Oh man, I'm trying to find the actual. Then he came to his hometown and began to teach the people in their synagogue. They were astonished, says, "Where did this man get such wisdom and miraculous powers?" And so it goes on to say, isn't he the carpenter's son? Isn't his mother named Mary, and aren't his brothers James, Joseph, Simon, and Judas, and aren't all his sisters here with us? Where did he get all this? But they don't name him Joseph. Like, it's almost like, isn't this the guy who was the carpenter's son? It's like kind of almost past tensey. Matthew 13:54. And that's one aspect. The only other reasons it starts to get kind of interesting is that you wind up with other situations where now they're going to go confront Jesus. They think he's crazy. Joseph's not there. When he finally gets the cross and he's dying, it was his responsibility as the oldest son over his mother to ensure that she would be properly taken care of. And he releases her to John because he's there, not James. And so why would he need to release her if Joseph is alive? And so there's kind of these pieces that lead to the conclusion that sometime before Jesus' ministry began, Joseph died. Some of this lends to the speculation that he was an older man in his probably 30s or something, and that's why some people will say that. But you got to remember, your average life expectancy in that time period was 45. So
and Jesus died in his 30s.
Yeah, so
it wasn't natural causes.
Yeah. So
but don't worry, folks, he rose again,
Yeah.
and he's alive today.
So it's interesting. This Jesus is, when it says, "Isn't this the carpenter's son?" It says, "Is not this the carpenter, the son of Mary?" So here they're calling Jesus the carpenter, not Joseph. So that's Mark's edition in Mark chapter 6. So there's all these kind of pieces that fit. That Joseph somehow dies later in life, and so now you have this situation where, again, likely in his 40s or 50s, he would have died, and
Because he doesn't show up in any of Jesus' adult ministry. He's not there at all.
And I don't know, like how old, if he was like, say he was 20 when he got married to Mary, I mean, which we would think would be weird. Like he's 50 when Jesus is starting his ministry, if he started at 30, and it could be a little older than that. And so you wind up with like, yeah, he may have not, he had a pretty rough life, it's enough time to have the kids and all the people behind him, but dying as a subsistence farmer in Nazareth at the age of 50 probably would have been that'd be grandpa. That'd be an old enough age.
Now you guys study, culture and background stuff more than I do, for sure.
Stuff.
So one thing that you just said that struck a note in my head was, okay, so Mary had four sons, Jesus, James, Joseph, and what was the last one?
James, Joseph, Judas, and Simon.
Okay.
And Jesus.
So
Fine.
Jesus obviously, wasn't Joseph's kid, right? And they were told by the angel what to name Jesus. But why would they go James and then Joseph? Don't you usually name your first son after?
Well, they don't have Joseph. It's Joseph.
Joseph?
Not Joseph.
No, you would name somebody in the family, from what I was told. Usually you use a family name to name your kids. I don't know if they name the first one. Do they usually name the first one after the son?
Well, then actually, when you read James, remember his name is Jacob.
Yeah,
Jacobos. We translate Jacob as James because King James wrote
had the translation.
He wanted his name in the Bible, and so every time Jacob showed up in the New Testament, they translated it as James. And so really are not his brothers Jacob and Joseph. So grandpa's name
Isn't the name Jacob and King James?
And so
Red letter edition. Isn't that his middle
name?
name?
This is actually why it leans me towards Joseph's father being Jacob and not Eli. Because Eli never shows up in the list of the sons.
Yeah.
You name him after grandpa, and then after dad, and then after the next important people is Simon and Judas, which is another form of Judah.
I know these referred to as a carpenter, but a lot of people think like he's doing something just with wood. But when studying it, I found out it's kind of like a fix-it man that works with stone as well. And
he's a construction worker.
He's a guy who goes to your house, and if you have something broken, repairs it, fixes it, or gives you a new one, or makes something. I was like, oh, he's mending broken things. I thought that was more of an interesting take on the occupation of Joseph and Jesus. He gives new things, but he also mends broken things. And I know a lot in the ancient world, you would find in an archaeological site, it's Jewish and that's at this time period because they made a lot of things out of stone that you would make out of wood or other things because they thought it was easier to keep it clean. And so oftentimes when they find a burial mound, they'll look for stoneware cups because they'll carve into the stone and use it as a cup. And so that would have been something that Jesus would have been familiar with. And even some people suggest metallurgy as well.
Yeah, they say metal.
And so you got what he calls the smith. He's a smithy,
Jesus.
like when people would go to people's houses and fix broken objects.
So what was Jesus' last name? Smith.
Which is that idea is different than like him coming over and making a furniture piece. Not that he couldn't do that, but just as a guy who you need that in a community where you couldn't go to Walmart and just replace what you bought with a $20 cheap thing. Someone had to come in and look at what you had and try to keep it as strong as they could, especially with all the dietary laws and the cleanliness and the things going on in a household.
It's not unlikely also that they just build houses. That they would build, they were literally the construction workers, especially from Nazareth. One of the books I was reading, and what I was
the
taught
handyman
is that they would get their jobs. They would walk down into Sepphoris, which was this bustling, growing Gentile city, and it's just kind of growing. And you would get your work, and they were great. They were considered good, like hard workers,
good craftsmen,
the Jewish people.
hard workers.
And so they would go down there, they would build whatever they needed to build. It was okay for them to do it, and they would return. What's fascinating is then now read Jesus' illustrations throughout all of the Bible. How many of them are building illustrations? What man would design a tower and then not figure out the cost? And I mean, how many of these did he run into? Like, he was like, yeah, that guy wanted to build that thing and he ran out of money.
Well, just having a log in your eye. Again, as a wood example.
Yeah.
You got a speck in someone's eye, and I just have him picking up a piece of wood,
beam
in your eye.
He's like, or what is a good disciple like? He's one who digs down to the foundation stone and lays it on the rock and not on the top of the sand. Well, how does he know? Well, he's done it in Sepphoris.
Well, this is something interesting because to me, a lot of people don't think of their jobs and occupations as having spiritual ramifications. And you can see that even in the life of Jesus, he's taking the very salt of the earth jobs, things that you work with your hands. They pose a lot of spiritual implications because that's most of what your New Testament is. It's trying to explain spiritual things in everyday language. And so you never know how your good example, your hard work, and all these things that we do and we labor in can really be a good springboard to a conversation about spiritual things and what really matters in life. And people often talk about building their family or building their house or my household. And you're using these imageries that are very biblical. And so never to think of your occupation as something that God couldn't use to have a spiritual conversation is kind of interesting.
Another thing that people always bring up is the dates and times of Herod, the wise men. People picture the wise men at the manger and the star above the manger. And so a lot of times the nativity story gets debunked a little bit because it kind of gets exactly the Nineveh scene
with the big fish.
Nativity
That's from like Narnia, the Narnia scene too.
Oh, it isn't the Nineveh scene where they're slapping each other with fish. Isn't that from like VeggieTales?
Yes. What was that called? Which one?
That was
Jonah.
Jonah and the big. Yeah.
I love VeggieTales.
Me too.
But people kind of debunk the nativity scene because they say these things don't line up historically and whatnot. What say you? I mean, people talk about the three wise men where, it's never mentioned that there's three wise men.
It's not.
You know, that probably just comes from the fact
They're
that
all
there were
kings.
three gifts. Right?
We also
mentioned.
call them kings. Oftentimes, that's not necessarily the image that we're getting there as well.
They're Magi, which is, there's debates over whether they come from South Africa or whether they come from Babylon or Persia. I have a tendency to lean toward, obviously, the Babylonian Persian concepts, because they had a reason to have a background. There's Daniel there, and there was known Jewish communities in that area. And it hyperlinks back to the book of Daniel where the word Magi is actually used. So I typically try to let the Bible take me to where it seems to be referencing.
Just be careful, like in anything in our life, we are a culture that picks up narratives, and it's just the way we learn. And so sometimes going back through your Bible and going, hey, my narrative is wrong. Like when we went through the Exodus, I had this experience too.
Keep in mind, your narrative is wrong, not necessarily the events are wrong.
Right.
Yeah, and so for instance, like when we were doing the Exodus, I didn't realize how much of my views of the Exodus have to be removed because I've watched the 10 Commandments so long. And it's a great movie, and it get me interested in the Bible, but like that there are really different narratives and different cultural things going on. But when you're young and you have that shape, maybe for you it's Prince of Egypt. The same thing about nativity, like the fact that we think it's a barn. The fact that there are usually depictions of three kings in a barn with Joseph and Mary and this
or
angel.
a cave if you're Hispanic, because there's actually a tradition in the ancient church that it was a cave that they were staying at.
And so we kind of lose sight. Well, what really did happen? And sometimes tradition upon tradition on tradition, you got to pull back the layers and go back to the original source, because somebody's going to hit you with the traditional argument as opposed to what's actually scriptural.
Oh, they'll be all over like, did you know that there was no innkeeper to say there's no room in the inn? Yes, we did.
We did.
Yes, we did. It's not in the Bible. And no, the innkeeper's never mentioned. He's not there. I hate to bring that up, but...
And I know you're picturing Linus right now, and... that's not fact. That was peanuts. Right? So, but yeah, and I will say too, a lot of times those traditions that we grew up with, those narratives that we have absorbed in our life, bring a lot of tension to you when you're confronted with.
I'll give you a real hard one for some people, and because they just don't think of it, they just pick it up, and that is that Jesus was born on 1 AD. Because there's no zero. By the way, it goes 1 BC and then it goes 180. There's not zero. It doesn't do that. And so you have this situation where Herod, archaeologically and historically speaking, dies in 4 BC. And so we have Jesus being born if Herod's alive, and Jesus is born before even Herod. Jesus is being born somewhere between 2 and 4 BC. So Jesus is born before Christ.
Yeah, before BC, yeah.
Yeah, it's so you people will bring this kind of stuff up. It's not hidden. It's not like, oh my goodness, that was based on an early church calculation that was incorrect. They didn't have some of the documentation we have about when Herod was alive and what was going on, and when the Gregorian calendar was set. Not me, I didn't set it. That was wrong. So it's not like, oh, see, your Bible's wrong. No, the Bible didn't say. In fact, they weren't even calculating in 80 BC at the time period.
Like, hey, everybody, we're going to change the calendar now. There's a baby in Nazareth, or in Bethlehem, that's going to be born. We're going to change the dates now. We're going to start from 1.
I mean, and that's an apologetic piece, right? I mean, you got to remember that this is Jesus we're talking about. We're not talking about some famous, like everybody thinks that Jesus is famous. No, nobody knew this was going on. Nobody cared this was going on. Nobody changed the dates. It took hundreds of years later that they changed the dates.
Right.
And so it's like, let's not forget that the fact that we're talking about Jesus at all is crazy. It's radically crazy. I mean, he didn't conquer anybody. He didn't like kill anybody. He dies on a Roman cross like 100,000 other people. And probably those 10 years 10 years after or whatever. But it's like, this isn't like some of these people that we would think who had the ears of kings or conquered, like Muhammad, who killed, and ruled and did all this stuff and conquered cities in order to be known. It's not, Jesus didn't do any of that stuff.
Yeah. So. And Jesus wasn't the first person to proclaim that he was God. I mean, like every Caesar, Pharaoh, and everybody did that before him, and and nobody remembers most of them.
Right.
So,
well, and I always like that you name your kids John, you name your kids Jacob, you name your kids these different, you name your dog Caesar or whatever. That's like how, at least in the European tradition, you would name your dog after Nero or Brutus. These are all the famous Roman names.
I had a dog named Brutus. I didn't name him after the guy. I named him after the guy on Popeye.
Right.
So.
Well, it's just like our nativity then is a representation to tell the story, and you can use the same nativity to tell the story accurately. You can say, I know this is shaped like a barn, but I like the idea that Jesus is born in what we would consider like a garage, really, with the animals and stuff underneath the house or whatever. And the Bible Project has a really nice one on the first and second chapter of Matthew, where it kind of gives you this imagery of the house, them underneath the bottom of the house or whatever, and all these animals and stuff. And I just think that's a pretty picture. What I would love to see is new art, that's closer to the accuracy of it, so that you still have the traditions, but you're able to kind of put back some of those pictures. But you can say, like, these wise men here, they're off to the side because these three came later, but he's still a part of the proclamation of the birth of Christ. And that's why they were seeking out this king, because of who he was, not because of the birth date. I know we care more about birthdays in our culture than they would have in the ancient world.
They probably didn't. And that's why I think they could get away with Jesus being Joseph's son. Like, they weren't lying about it, I don't think, but they were just like, for the sake of cultural rest, for the sake of the honor, shame, it's just, this is my son. He adopted him. He was his. That it was his biologically is different. And so there's just that sense of like, oh, okay, it does start to fit together really well as an actual cohesive story.
It's great. The elements in the story, what I realized, especially going through Matthew 1 and 2 and then going back through the Luke chapters that you were talking about, is that a lot of these are callbacks to this new kind of Moses, this Exodus figure that shows up in the text. You have Jesus being this kind of new Moses. You have Herod killing babies of 1 and 2. And I'm like, well, who's done that before? Well, the Pharaoh. And then he's called in. Joseph takes his family to Egypt, and because an angel tells him to go there, and he has a dream, and he goes to Egypt, and then from there the dream tells him to go back. So as you're going back to the Promised Land, and you have these Exodus imageries that are saying, look, one like Moses is coming, and he's doing things like Moses would have done to him, and so it's giving you this connection, because in the Old Testament, the thing that people looked back to their salvation was that Passover lamb and that whole Passover event, and so this is linking those two events, and so oftentimes you ask those questions, why are these elements even in the story? And as I was thinking about the Magi, what do you guys think the Magi are even in the story for in the first place? These foreign people just show up following astrology? How is that biblical in any sense? Because we're talking about astrology and things like that.
I think, first of all, there is a sense of like these that there's a sense of the nations bringing in their gifts. This is like one of the messianic, I forget which psalm it is. That's what I was going to try to look up. But then the idea there is that these, at this point, I'm not sure. So that is definitely part of it, though, that the nations are coming to bow down before the Messiah is an ancient trope of the Psalms. It is like, hey, he's going to be a king over all the nations, not just one of them. I think I haven't dove completely deeply into all that, but that's my primary kick. Why is it got to be these astrologers and stuff like that? Well, I think, again, the powers of heaven are declaring that this king is born. And so you see that in both Matthew and Luke, where it says, where they're relegated as stars in the book of Matthew, which for people don't know, stars are a reference to angelic powers. And so there is a sense that in Luke, the angels actually show up and proclaim it. In Matthew, the powers of the universe are actually proclaiming it as well. And so, it would be interesting if you thought of it as like, hey, what if what they saw somehow was actually when the angels are announcing to the shepherds what's going on, the Magi are paying attention to the stars, are seeing this event in some kind of astronomical way, because there seems to be an association between the stars of heaven and the angelic activities. So that's another aspect to that. I also do think it is a callback to the book of Daniel to remind us that Daniel said that these things would be happening, and that Nebuchadnezzar was one who had a vision of the nations from Daniel, who was the top of the Magi, and he said that the Messiah is going to come in the time of the Roman Empire. I think this is all like just shouting, go back to the book of Daniel. Look at what it says. Look at when the Messiah is supposed to be here.
Yeah, we kind of went over this a little bit in the men's group of talking about like what am I supposed to compare in these texts, and what I see are an interesting comparison that's often used throughout the the New Testament as well, and this idea that people who legitimately are seeking God, even when they have limited information, they have a limited understanding of who He is, when they seek Him sincerely, they find Him. But those who have lots of information and refuse to submit to even looking for the Messiah don't find Him. And so when we compare in Matthew chapter 2, Herod is like, bring Him to me. Instead of, they're going like 900 or 600 miles out of the way to find the baby Jesus. They're looking for Him. Herod's like, well, bring Him to me, and I'll see if He's really going to be the king, or I'll be the king of my life. And you just have this comparison where, okay, if you're not going to serve me, even though you know about me, and you say, because Herod was a convert to Judaism and to Yahweh supposedly, and then he calls all the scribes and Pharisees and says, where's Jesus going to be born? And they're like, in Bethlehem, up the street. And then nobody goes with the wise men to go find the baby Jesus to worship Him, even though they know where He's going to be born. They have all the information. They say they serve God. These foreigners are the ones that are looking for Him because they're legitimately seeking a Messiah. And they're going to bow down the knee. And I think that comparison is for us more like a cautionary tale, that if you're a Christian, you have all this information. What God really wants you to do is act on that information by submitting to that information and bowing before the King. And that's why I get encouraged when I hear stories like God can reach people in places we never thought possible, especially in Persia. Like if you're looking at that area now, it would be like Iran. How does God meet people in Iran? Well, you get weird visions of people seeing that they've had Jesus, and they're like, who's this Jesus? And then they find somebody who's a Christian mysteriously. And so if God wants to use a weird other person's cultural religious beliefs to draw attention to Him, if they're truly seeking Him, I think they can find Him. And I think you see that very early on in this text. So it's like, it's a cautionary tale that you can have all the knowledge of God that you want, but if you're not seeking the truth and submitting to it, then it could really, you expect God to come to you. And so that was kind of the way, what I noticed from reading that story that I never caught before. And I think sometimes the reason why God brings outsiders into the narrative, we think, oh, these people aren't part of God or whatever. And then they're acting more like Christians than we are.
Well, and beyond, I think one of the reasons that the Magi are called kings, I was just looking at this, is because
the second, third century or whatever.
Psalm 72 is kind of referencing this idea about this Messiah figure, and he's like talking about that may he have dominion from sea to sea and from the river to the ends of the earth. May desert tribes bow down before him, and his enemies lick the dust. May the kings of Tarshish and the coastlands render him tribute. May the kings of Sheba and Seba, with Sheba being in Arabia and Seba being somewhere in Africa, bring gifts. May all kings fall down before him, all nations serve him. So I think the idea that they're kings that are coming comes from an interpretation that this is kind of Psalm 72 happening. But it doesn't have to be the actual kings. It would be the rendering of these gifts being brought.
These are priestly kingship type people. Yeah. So
it's an interesting stuff. I think that they but again, this is all fodder, unfortunately, for a lot of TikTok non-Christian etc's out there to go like, see, this is just mythology. And one of the big ones is actually is this idea in Luke about, so you get Matthew's stuff with Magi and Herod, and okay, how early is this? Because now we're talking 4 BC when he dies. So somewhere before 4 BC, and we know that's when Herod is, and you got these Magi coming, but then you've got, and it's somewhere about 2 years, possibly, like the age of Jesus in the book of Matthew. So that's one of the questions, like, right? When did these Magi show up?
Yeah, when did they show up? Because they don't show up in the nativity scene in Bethlehem in the manger, which was where we usually put them in our nativity.
Right, and it's likely the traditional version is they come 12 days later.
Is it really?
Yeah.
Is that where we get the 12 days of Christmas?
Yeah, it's called Epiphany when they appear, when they come. So you got December 25th, and then 12 days later, this occurs. And some of the problems that people point out is like, okay, it seems like Jesus, like would they have been just coming out of Jerusalem, like because they just had him circumcised? There's all this other information. Second problem is that they call him a child, and we're not so sure they would call an infant that young a child yet. And the third thing is that Herod seems to kill 2-year-olds and below.
Right.
And so it seems to be that it took them they saw the star rise, and it took them about 2 years to get there, somewhere around there, so that maybe Herod just overdid it and said, we'll just go tune down. So it may have been somewhere like a year, but it was a long journey for them. And then you've got that. So now we're talking pushing Jesus' birth somewhere back to 5-6 BC. And now you're really thrown off when Luke drops this census. And he says, listen, this guy named Quirinius, he was governor over Syria, and he was there's this thing. But according to Josephus, Quirinius was governor of Syria in AD 6 to 7 and conducted a census in 86, which Luke is aware of and mentions in Acts chapter 5. So this can't be the census Luke is referencing. And so there's all this hot debate over, this is all made up, and Luke doesn't know what he's talking about. So, what do we do with that? That's have you guys ever heard anything about that or worked on any of that?
I've just noticed that there's a lot of discrepancies with current views on different calendars, different events, and what they're using to make certain timelines. And so it is a archaeological debate on certain records that they're looking at. That's all that I'm aware of, really, is that, a lot of this stuff is based on what we currently know, not necessarily all of the information that they had at the time it was written. So there might be some information that's missing, but I know that there are a lot of calendar discussions that happened a lot of times, and oftentimes in the past when they've done something like this against the Bible, it ends up we find a new piece of information that goes, actually, this is going on, and this could very possibly be true. So,
and for me, no, I haven't really done much with that because I am geographically impaired. So when anybody talks about places, I have no idea where it is. How far away it is, how close it is, and I am horrible with dates. If you ask me when an event happened, I have no idea. So those are two things that never troubled me.
Oh, so blissful. If it's troubled you and you care, there's a couple ways to answer the question, and I think they're the best effective ways to really deal with this objection that people want to throw at the Christmas story is, first of all, just the Greek. There is a way to read this. It says, and if you're looking at the book of Luke, chapter 2, it says, in those days, a decree went out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be registered. This was the first registration when Quirinius was governor of Syria. That's that translation of verse 2. That word first can also be translated, this was the registration before Quirinius was governor, is another way that it can be translated. In fact, you'll notice there's a little 2 down here. If you have like an ESV, it'll say this was the first registration when, or this is the first registration, and then the little 2 says you'll look down before Quirinius was governor. And so you can see that this wouldn't have been necessarily that Quirinius was the one doing it, but this is before that. Now, the second argument, and this is where this is my personal.
Is your favorite book?
Enjoyable argument. I enjoy this argument more, and only because I think it does something that is necessary. One of the things you got to learn, and when you read commentaries and you read secular historians, especially,
like Josephus is one here that's
right.
pretty big.
Josephus is the one everybody's pointing to, and here's the thing: everybody thinks something's not lying to them. So look, put all my cards on the table. I don't think the Bible's lying to me. I think it's closer to the source material. I think it's happening. It's the actual story. I think God's inspired it. And so now that means why can't, some people will go, they think Josephus isn't lying to them. Why?
Because Josephus isn't religious, right?
but he is religious.
That's what I'm saying.
He's Jewish.
Well, I know he's the historian, but the Bible's not historical. It's religious. So there's in some people's minds,
That's not true. He's actually making an apologetic for the Jewish faith and trying to basically save his own skin with the Romans. Like Josephus is totally biased.
It's this idea that we think that ancient historians were like modern historians in the sense that we think that they don't have an opinion, that they're trying to be objective observers of history, which is never the case, even modern-wise. But I do think there's this misconnection between people going, well, I trust Josephus. And you're like, why? Because it's not the Bible. And you're like, That's not a logical argument. He has his own agenda, has his own religious ideological position.
And his own sources.
He has his own sources. Not only that, he does have a religious agenda. Like, he does have thoughts on religion that are fueling his ability to write history.
Now, what's fascinating is this is the Journal of the Evangelical Theological Society. It's volume number 54 from March of 2011. And in it, John Rhodes, he's a professor that is actually from Concordia University in Chicago. He actually argues that Josephus misdates the census of Quirinius. And his argument, while he attests that there's plenty of argumentation to show that you could probably, if you wanted to, you could trust that that Josephus is right. But he says, no. He thinks that what happens, and he can show it in the text, that Josephus has a tendency to take different sources that are talking about the same event and miscategorize them, so that when you get to this section, he actually says that, look, the same rebellion happens 3 times in a row. And it's this rebellion by a guy named Judas. And these Judas guys are just not helpful, I guess. But what's interesting is that in the end, he says, look, it seems to be clear that you could actually argue that Josephus messes up his chronology, and that Quirinius is actually governor at the time period of Herod, because he seems to be interacting with Herod and dealing with Herod's problems. So, but his dating is off because he keeps repeating these dates and these events from his various sources. And he's actually been shown to do this a few times now. And so there's been a little bit of like, hey, pushback on, Josephus ain't as Loctite as everybody thinks he is.
Yeah, when you look at archaeological conversations, you want to look at what are people using for their ruler or their kind of linchpin. Is it Josephus? Is it something that's just everything but the text that you're disputing? And typically people aren't making comparisons, they're making conclusions why something can't be right or wrong. And sometimes you have to take all of the options available and look at them clearly. But it is interesting, though. But do you trust the Bible, and what sources do you trust?
And that's really my thing. It just goes back. The reason I like this one is because it kind of pokes at, okay, yeah, you have your sources you think are true. And some people are just most people, I hate to say it this way, are like parrots. They're just like, Josephus, they don't even know they're quoting Josephus. They don't even realize that, like, they just go like, oh, Luke, there was no census of that time period. Ha! And you're like, do you know the argument? Do you know why the argument's there? Do you understand? Yeah, and it's really important to me to let our audience know that, hey, there are viable reasons to trust your Bible, and they trust something else, which you would expect. So everybody has something they think doesn't lie to them.
And they're parrots.
And they're parrots?
And they're parrots.
Let's turn this into a pirate podcast.
Don't copy me. Don't copy me. And now we come full circle.
Don't copy me.
Don't copy me.
Don't copy me.
Don't stop it.
No.
You stopped it. Thank you.
We're going to be eating scabs here in a minute.
Yes. All right.
We have to keep bringing that up.
So I know it's going to be the topic that never. Whoever wrote that question, is going to be infamous. Famous.
Just let that question scab over and heal.
Yeah. So, coming out of the holidays, which maybe we should have thought about this before the holidays, discussing this.
It still lingers on.
But also, you're lingering from it, and then we're going into more holidays with the new year. Tips and strategies to deal with difficult relationships, family relationships, difficulties getting through the holiday season. What kind of tips would we throw out there as pearls of wisdom?
Lots of eggnog? No, don't do that. No, don't do that.
Why? I love eggnog. It's not healthy.
Well, part of it,
I don't put alcohol in it. That ruins it. I like just eggnog. Boom chocolate.
Some people don't put the eggnog in it. That's the problem.
Yeah.
They just drink the alcohol.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, but I think
what's the nog part of the egg? That's what I'm just wondering. Like, That just sounds. What's the nog? I'm just curious. And is there egg in it? Really?
There is egg in it. Yeah, it's made with raw egg and like milk or cream and
Nog.
and then nutmeg and
Maybe that's the nog.
spices.
Nutmeg is nog. I don't know what
I don't know what the nog is, but
That sounds like an old English
is.
word.
Let us in. We're going to do a cooking show.
yeah.
No, to me, it's like you see what we're talking about here is like how complicated the first coming of Christ was. The first Christmas was a little stressful. There were some family rifts, as we talked about just in your monologue. And Christmas can be a time, I think, where people, they deal with lost loved ones or just people not getting along, or just talking with some of the congregant members, how many different houses people had traveled to during the weekends. I know someone had 3 houses they went to.
And you're trying to get the kids dressed and ready and go on a long road trip to visit somebody, and they got presents at home and they're cranky.
Well, you don't get what you want. I mean, just there's so many emotions that happen during this holiday
Kids don't get what you want, and then they're yelling and cranky, and you're cranky because your kids are cranky and entitled. And
then some pastor says, you should do something spiritual at Christmas time. And like, how do I fit that in without not wanting to kill everybody? And so it can be a stressful time, and it brings up a lot of kind of just missed family opportunities. And so that's why I thought it would be an interesting conversation. How do you guys deal with those issues, or what do we do during the holidays on your stressful ones to just be the peace, remind people of the peacemaker at least?
Obvious. The things that we do really is just when I'm like, I gather with my family on Christmas Eve, my side, and then we gather with Tressa's family on Christmas Day, and then it's our little family on Christmas morning. So like Christmas, both of the family gatherings, we pray, and obviously keep it centered around Christ that way. The little gathering, we do, we read the Christmas story before we open presents and stuff like that. And I don't read them now. We make the kids read them. So that
you assign them to other people.
But I mean, you're talking more or less like, how do you keep the peace in a tense situation?
Or a difficult time. I mean, I didn't grow up in always like the Christian model home. So it was pretty chaotic, and people have different experiences with Christmas that it's almost negative to them. And so it's just like, how am I supposed to honor the baby Jesus when everybody's screaming in my family and doing all these weird things, or cousins are fighting, or whatever your situation is, or just pettiness. People can just be very petty on the holidays because everybody's kind of focused on, I don't know, themselves or just their stresses. So I just like making it real for some people. How do you stay Christian if your family isn't the kind that would pray, or maybe someone's fighting, or what do we do to keep the peace during the holidays? What is the role of a Christian in that difficult situation?
Not from personal experience, because my family has always been pretty harmonious. Not really. There's not a lot of division in our family. In fact, I was really fortunate in the sense that Nancy's family and my family got along. We all did Christmas together, Christmas Eve together, or at least some of them. So I never was that had to choose. And have that complications of relationships. And just from a relationship standpoint, I think there was a year maybe where my sisters weren't getting along, but it was never to that, if she's going to be there, I'm not going to go. And, treating each other poorly. It was more of just, they had some tension going on in their relationship. But I know that there are families that dread the holidays because there's so much dysfunction going on. And I'm not saying that there's not dysfunction in my family at all. It's just, we've learned to deal with it, But one of the things I think too is, don't wait till the holidays to deal with it. Start building those bridges and mending those fences well ahead of the holidays. And also, I think another tool that you could do is, and I don't mean ignoring that there is dysfunction and difficulties in relationships, but also, treat others in the manner of the relationship you would want, and not necessarily the one that you have. As long as it's not abusive and they're beating on you, and but if you want a healthy then do the things that take place in a healthy relationship, and don't just focus on the negative, and kind of be a little realistic that this is what a relationship is, but also having that attitude of, but this is what I want it to be, and I want to be the model to model that for my family as well, you know.
So yeah, I think I agree with you, Brent, on that, especially the idea that you can't let that holiday, that Christmas day or that Christmas party be the place that is the suddenly now you're going to have the confrontation. I don't think that's the appropriate place for the confrontation. I think like Ecclesiastes would give us wisdom that there's a time and a place for everything. And that's not probably the place to have the conflict at, right? You should, and Jesus very clearly, as we'll find out in the next series, Offended, wait for the setup, we'll find out in the second sermon that basically, he tells us take responsibility. If there's if there's something going on in your life, whether it's been done to you or you've done it to them, it's your responsibility to deal with. So, we can't get out of that. So have you gone to try to deal with that? Have you forgiven? Have you brought reconciliation? Have you apologized? Have you amended? There's these topics of things that you probably want to do before the holiday kicks into gear at all. Second is that then by that point whether or not you need to close the gate on your boundaries, because there are some cases that the person should not be invited over. And if I know in my family there's some people that if they showed up, some of my family would leave because they have to draw that boundary for safety for themselves. And I mean, I don't feel that way towards that couple myself, but I would respect their decision. And I would make sure that I'm not the one defending their decision. That's for them to deal with. And so just understanding your boundaries, where you begin or where you end and other people begin, and where your family's borders are and what you will accept through the gate or not. And really, it's not fair to have a party if you haven't made those clear. Like, you should make those boundaries clear and try to mend those broken fences before you've had them over, but making it clear that if you violate this will be what happens. Yeah. I think the book Safe People, Boundaries, and How to Have That Difficult Conversation, all by Cloud and Townsend, those 3 books align really well. Something that if you've got family tensions and Easter's coming or whatever, really work through those 3 books. They can give you a lot of good leadway on what to do when you're working on broken relationships, especially in family. And I'll be honest, I think what's difficult for me and Brent is I don't have divorce in my family going way back. Like, there's divorce in my family, but it's not in my lineage. So it's like we kind of didn't have to do the whole run to that broken house and run to that broken house and then try to make those 2 people get along. And, and now you're dealing almost like a triangulated third party. I think that's also a critical thing. Don't take on the position of the, quote, peacemaker if it's not been asked of you by the 2 parties.
Or if you're a child especially.
Right. And because you can't do that. And don't allow yourself to be triangulated either. You have to have the ability to say one divorced parent, the other divorced parent is trying to get you to do this and tell your mom. You just go, you're an adult. You tell mom that you're triangulating me in. I don't feel comfortable. Draw a boundary. Keep somebody from making you their go-between when it's not your position.
That sounds so weird that Greg doesn't want to be triangulated.
I like triangles, but not in this case.
Life is a triangle.
No, I mean, I just know that from growing up and just watching people, some people just trying to survive. And I do think sometimes if you're a Christian, you probably need to think about what role God wants you to play with what role you're playing in the family as well. If you're an adult and you're a Christian, it may be different. I do think, though, just like Joseph in the story is sacrificing, even taking on the shame in order to bring about the birth of the baby Jesus, there's something about that narrative that says there might be a role for you to be the person who steps in and takes the hits so that you can express Christ to someone who may need to hear that or mend a fence. It's not that you're mending it. I'm not saying be the savior, but I'm saying if you can bring peace to someone else in your family, if you can care and sacrifice for someone else, I think thinking about the people that could be loved on during the holiday is a good way to express what the love of the Lord is. And I think you see that in the early story of the narrative.
Yeah, I think a really a good way to start that journey is to remind yourself that you don't know as much about these people as you think you do. It's always good to go in curious. It's always good, even if they've been somebody who's that's been difficult with you, do your best to go in further. What else did you not know? What else have you not talked about? Sometimes you'll be surprised that while there's still a problem on one level of your relationship, by asking questions and discovering other aspects of their life, you open doors for the relationship to grow stronger so that it doesn't break when you have to address the conflict in some cases. Obviously, I'm not talking about horrendous situations. I'm talking about basic difficulties. Because then it's not so much that because if all you have is the conflict, that's when your holiday is the worst, right? Because that's the only thing you have in your relationship. But if you are willing to dig in a little bit, discover more interests, and just kind of put your ugh, I don't like that at all. Put that aside for a minute and be interested maybe in what they're interested in. Paul would kind of say, to the Gentiles, I become a Gentile, to the Jew, I become a Jew. That kind of idea. Be interested long enough that you can discover sometimes there are links and things that unite you with a person that you didn't know. And it can actually help you have a decent connection, even though there still may be some kind of tension or some kind of difficulty that, while it can't be addressed directly there, gives you some other direction.
But also, keep an open mind and open heart, and be willing to be the first to forgive, and be the first to step into to the difficulties with humility and love and the desire for unity and reconciliation. So, and granted, that could be a very painful place to be, and you may get hurt again and again, but I think part of that is what we're called to, as long as it's, not super abusive. I think the Bible kind of tells us to take some abuse for the purpose of love and the gospel. But I know it's kind of culturally no, we need to be safe. It depends on what you're talking about. So if you're really trying to win somebody over, be humble, present the gospel, and affect somebody's life, we have to be willing to take some abuse. And again, that measure of abuse is something that needs to be considered. But you're probably not going to get there without some pain and difficulty, and sacrifice as well. So, God be with you in that, because it is difficult.
Yeah,
it's difficult. And so if you are struggling with those, send in your questions. But also, I just think that looking at a model of Christ, humbling himself and caring for others, and not just looking at your own interests, but also the interest of others, is helpful in those times of difficulty. So if you're struggling with that, let us know. We'd like to answer your questions specifically, but I just know a number of people just had a stressful Christmas. Yeah. And others of you had a joyous Christmas. And so praise God. I think it's good to enjoy the moments that are really a blessing. So I don't know, before we close, what was your best moment this Christmas for you guys? What was it for you? Do you have a good moment with the family? Was there a funny thing that you guys did? What was your favorite memory this particular year? Was it preaching? 4 services?
Oh, yeah, totally. That was exhausting. It was still fun, but it was I think for me, it's still just I got 4 kids, and it's just fun to watch them open gifts and hang out and just talk. And so the whole day is cool. I definitely was the atmosphere of that kind of opportunity to connect with everybody was really nice. It was really good. So I can't pick out that moment when that thing happened, but I think in general the whole day was pretty special.
Yeah, and I mean just and I know Christmas is a really a holy day, of celebration. But aside from that, just the family part of my favorite part was I always enjoy that it is totally a family day for my family, and just seeing the joy in the kids, the excitement in the kids, and one of the things that Alyssa, my daughter, she lives in Washington. She is not about presents, especially for the kids. You can get them a little bit, but don't get them a bunch of junk that we gotta find room for or whatever. And she's kind of a minimalist. Like, they get toys. What toys are you getting rid of to give to some needy child, and then you're replacing them? But so she's got this thing the last few years of like, I don't want toys, I want memories. So when it comes to Christmas, a couple of years ago they came down and we did Disneyland. This year we did Knott's Berry Farm yesterday, and her husband Johnny had never been to Knott's Berry Farm. Obviously the grandkids never been. So just to see the joy, and Oliver's like 6 years old and absolutely loves roller coasters, and just the more exciting if he's big enough, he's going on it, and he was just in amazement of it. And
you're a Knott's Berry Farm expert by this point. So
you know what? I am not. And again, part of that is I'm geographically impaired. I mean, we go there every year, right?
Do you get lost in
and
the ghost town?
My wife's like, "Where's this?" And I'm like, "I don't know."
It's not that big of a park.
Where's this? I don't know. It's like, okay.
Don't go with him anywhere.
Either over there
Do
or
not.
over there.
Do not. And I mean, I will say, me and my oldest daughter, Alyssa, have no sense of direction. And Corinne and Nancy are
This
much
explains
better.
why he told me that we wandered around in Camp Snoopy most of the time. Like, you couldn't get out of the corner of the park. We don't know
For
where
40 years, people. For 40 years.
Oh my gosh.
Yes.
Yeah, that's scary. No, I guess I gotta say, like, the funniest moment for me, I guess, is when my youngest son got a stormtrooper helmet. And he literally sat there playing a video game with his stormtrooper helmet on, and I'm just going,
That brings him joy.
Well,
nerd. Yep,
yeah.
we got a nerd.
it
in the
either
family.
wasn't
Bring me joy.
It either wasn't a shooting game or he didn't win.
Yeah, it was a shooting game. And I don't
Did
know
he
if he
hit the
shot very well.
target?
Yeah, it's just like he said, I see why people why they miss so much. This thing has got no angles
That's
on the right.
hilarious. For me, it was really the kids this year was really tough. People were just sick all over the place, and even though everyone was sick, my favorite moment is when they came over, they had their toys or whatever, but they just fell asleep on me because they were just tired, they were done, and so just being able to hug on them a little bit and let them cough and make me sick probably was fun. And then after, when they felt a little better, we played Red 7, and that was my best moment, where I got all the kids and we played a little game. But really, just being able to do that, you gotta enjoy those moments when they come and have fun with those moments.
Well, and you guys have had your moments. You can let us know what those moments were too. We'd love to hear from you, and that you can let us know at Rabbit Trail at obcc.church. It's Rabbit Trail at obcc.church. And we're going into a new year, 2024, so we'll see you next year.
2024.
On our 100th episode.
100th episode.
And he will stop repeating me eventually. But no, if you've got any comments, any thoughts, send us some of your favorite moments. We'd love to do a little bit of review and celebration.
Yes.
It's been we'll be doing no sermon next week, so we're gonna have to make stuff up. We need your guys' help, whatever you want to go on. In fact, we're celebrating our 2-year anniversary on this next episode.
2 years,
and we did a giant Q&A to launch that episode 0. So if this is the 100th episode, if that's episode 0, because this is the 99th.
This is actually 101.
No, it's not. That'll be whatever. So we're just glad you're with us. We hope that you have a great new year and that God will bless you as you continue to, chase the truth wherever it runs. We would love to join that with you. God bless you guys, and
Boom chakalaka.
Bye.